Good evening, everyone. I think we are all wired up and set to go at this point. Thank you for coming. If you haven't grabbed food, you maybe ought to. Tonight we put together a panel, as you can see from the title, Data Innovation Across the City. The idea of tonight's panel is to draw together some thought leaders and practitioners working in different industries who are thinking about the application of new data computing power as well as tools to their businesses. And we thought it would be a great idea to look at those industries that have a firm footprint here in New York City, but maybe aren't often in conversation with one another. And so that's the purpose of our panel this evening. So my name is Bob Richardson. I used to work for the New York City Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications, which was how my involvement here began. And I've since moved on to an innovation strategy and design technology firm called Control Group, who have many of the interests that the panelists as well have in looking at how data is useful for pushing forward and discovering the future of the businesses of which we are each involved. So I'm going to take just a few minutes here and introduce by name and title our participants. I'm going to start at the far end of the table. At the far end of the table, we have Amy Schreiber, who is the Director of Product Strategy, Media Products, and Advanced Technology for NBC Universal. Next to her is Anush Tatavosian. Anush is a Strategic Communications and Partnership Officer for UN Global Pulse. Next to Anush is Ken Allard. Ken Allard is the Managing Director of Global Business Strategy at Huge. Next to Ken is Brendan Sudol. Brendan is a data analyst for Etsy. Next to Brendan is Chris Dwan. Chris Dwan is the Acting Senior Vice President for IT and Research Computing at the New York Genome Center. Next to Chris is Andrew Nicklin. Andrew Nicklin is the Director of Research and Development at the New York City Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications, a former colleague. We actually shared an office and stared at one another across desks all day long, just shooting ideas back and forth. And next to Andrew is Jennifer Ritter. Jennifer Ritter is the Director of Creativity, Business Innovation, and Dream, which she'll explain a little bit more, at Estee Lauder. I'm very thankful that you've all joined us. Obviously, we have a stellar panel, and it's quite a number of people. So what we're going to do is ask some questions here of the panels and have them answer them one by one, and then ask a few more questions that sort of starts the conversation, and then I hope we're able to open that conversation up to the audience and just make it as open and free a discussion as we like. So in order to get started, I think one of the things that all of the panelists and I agreed about when we had our sort of preparation call was that computing power and tools are now advanced to the degree that their application within certain business verticals represented by all of these different individuals have really led to some new possibilities. And so the first of the questions that we had discussed with one another, and that I want to sort of take the opportunity to go one by one, and we can decide. I'm going to start with Jennifer and move down to Amy. The question really fundamentally is if you could just give us a sort of example of the kind of thing that you can do now with regard to data that you couldn't do even in the recent past.
Well, the things that we can do with data now are vast, and especially not just speaking on beauty, but more towards specifically Estee Lauder is representing luxury, which is very new to all, even online shopping is new to luxury. So what we've been able to do is really data mine our employees internally to find new ideas and innovations in unique ways. So that's completely new to our organization, and also it's helping us to drive business externally and find new information from our consumers as well.
Excellent. Andrew?
So I think for New York City, there's probably three. First is that we are in way better of a position to collect data than we ever have been before through sensor networks and through online transactions and so on. Second is we are doing or starting to get into the realm of predictive analytics. So, sort of understanding what the nature of the city is like, and then what things we can do to proactively either enforce or engage or what have you. And then the third thing is we're actively working to increase civic engagement, so making data available to the public so that we can have applications built against it, or we can have community analytics happen.
Chris?
So the things that we're able to do now are actually driven, I've worked with the Genome Center, they're driven more by biology than by technology per se. We are able to do whole human genomes at costs that approaching the $1,000 mark, which even 10 years ago that was a $1 billion question. And so being able to generate perhaps 130 gigabytes of data per individual and seamlessly store it and then use it medically simply couldn't have happened a decade or two ago. And as we continue to apply this new biology to medicine, we're going to generate just insane amounts of data.
Amazing.
So I'm at Etsy, and for those who don't know, it's an online marketplace for handmade and unique gifts and goods. And as a website and as an e-commerce site, we're very interested in understanding how people use the site and interact with the various features. And so one thing that we can now much more easily do is look at a visitor clickstream path, or essentially the sequence of things that people do upon coming to our site. And this allows us to answer some really interesting questions, such as what features are used often, and which elements of the site correlate more strongly with user retention, or where are the black holes on the site and where do people frequently leave. It also allows us to, we can assess differences in the experience between new users, people who haven't been to Etsy before, and people who come all the time. Also differences in how sellers on Etsy use the site versus how a non-seller would. So we're able to kind of use this information, tailor our products, and optimize that experience.
Ken?
Hi, I work for a company called Huge. We're a full-service digital agency, so most of the comments I make will be really with respect to what I'm seeing in our clients. And we have a lot of information services clients, and they're doing some amazing things. We have a client in DC called Avalier Health, and really with the ability to get new sets of data more quickly, it opens up new opportunities for them. So they now get a copy of all the Medicare claims data each year, and they're able to show the path of patient care. So by disease code, by patient type, by hospital, by geography, they can show what happens when you leave a hospital or a patient is released from a hospital, and where they go, whether it's home for home health care, or to a retirement community, or to a nursing home, or whatever that path is. And then they can look at the readmissions rate. So depending upon where they go and what disease state they had, where are they brought back to? And this analysis of this giant data set enables all sorts of different marketing programs. You can imagine a hospital is trying to figure out where the best place to release a patient to is. And you can imagine a nursing home marketing itself to hospitals saying, hey, we have the lowest readmissions rate for this disease type. And then if the whole entire healthcare law is now start to reimburse hospitals based upon readmissions rates. So it's just amazing what companies can do now with new data sets that are available to them. And that's one of the things that we're helping them develop.
That's excellent. Anush?
For an international organization, public sector focused on human development, one issue, one challenge has always been getting real-time information. What's happening in the present, especially as our world is changing and evolving such that there are so many quicker moving socioeconomic crises. So a financial crisis here can affect people in rural areas halfway across the globe very quickly. And getting real-time information about how people are being impacted has been a challenge. And we see an opportunity now with the massive amounts of data that's being produced from digital services, from social media, from mobile phones, to start to explore whether there is a way to harness some of that data to get a pulse, to get a real-time sort of check on how populations are faring and changes in human well-being. So for us, the question is not what we're able to do now that we weren't able to do previously, but what is even possible now. And so we're slowly just beginning at the UN. We've established Global Pulse as sort of an R&D lab to figure out how can we harness mobile phone data, social media data, things like this to try to get a pulse for how people are faring and changes in human well-being at a little bit of a faster pace than it's ever been possible before.
Amy?
So at NBC Universal, we have obviously a very large portfolio of content split across both TV and film and many different brands. And over the years, different opportunities for distribution have arose that have prompted us to create a new supply chain to deliver, for instance, video on demand or electronic sell-through like iTunes. And what's happened in our environment, and I don't think we're unique for any entertainment company, is that the data gets divided into the different supply chains. So one of the activities that's very hard for us to recognize is what's the total value of an individual asset in our portfolio. There is financial manual work that happens where different groups of people that work for different CFOs in different parts of the company will go and try to trace and find out how much did we earn when we had this in the pay-per-view window. And questions like when should we release to iTunes versus when should we burn something to disk are very hard questions to get at when people are creating distribution strategies for our secondary distribution for our content. So one of the things that we see is the opportunity really with processing data being able to be so much closer to our fingertips these days to really trace the story of the assets that we're distributing. And the story is really in the data. And if we can bring the data together and build analytics tools to have it within reach of our fingertips, there's all sorts of new predictive analytics that we'll be able to do. And it will really change our strategy for how we're distributing our content.
That's excellent. As I was listening to everyone answer the question, I'm impressed by the diversity of the talent that we have up here. There's a kind of distinctness to each of the answers, and at the same time, I think I'm struck by the fact that in every single case, right, the answer in some sense is that data is helping us to tell a story, right? There's this through line that we're discovering, right, from an origin point to some point that we've marked out as sort of important as part of the business process. And I think it's a really interesting fact that everybody's sort of discovering that story through these efforts. As part of that story that each of the panelists is working on discovering through data, I think that we were agreed as well that there were some surprising results, some maybe surprising turns in that story, some counterintuitive turns, of twists in the plot, if you will. And so I want to take this opportunity to ask each of the panelists as well, while working with data, in working in your jobs, what are some of the things that you've discovered that you were surprised by, that were counterintuitive? I think I'm going to go in the opposite direction this time. I'm going to make Amy start and come back in the other direction.
Started on an effort to really understand a little bit more about our digital audiences. And we thought, well, the path to this will be to aggregate all of the member data that we can get from different registration activities that we were doing across our digital properties, whether you signed up to play a game on USA Network or you signed up for a contest at Telemundo. The one thing that was in common is that we were asking for registration information. So we got a little ahead of ourselves and we thought, well, if we were able to aggregate all this together, we'll be able to do interesting audience segmentation. Well, we built the tools, we pulled the data in together, and when we looked at the data, it was just awful. And we were a bit surprised that we didn't think about consumer behavior and the idea of self-reported data. People just want to get to what they want to get to. They're not necessarily telling you the truth. And we invested all this opportunity into compiling everything together, and we're really surprised by the results.
Things along the way. First, helping people even just think about, it's sort of opening people's minds to thinking about the way that we across the world use digital services as a sensor. To think that Twitter data or mobile phone data or online purchases could be indicators of well-being. And that's sort of something that we're helping explore and look at examples out there in the existing body of research from social science research and sort of efforts like Google Flu Trends to say, oh, there's another way to look at the way we use digital services across the world. Another thing that's counterintuitive sort of is of course we face a digital divide. Everyone across the globe does not use mobile phones, does not use Google search. So we have to think creatively about what we can look to as a proxy indicator. So maybe people who do get online and do shop online are using online e-commerce to buy food, for example. So you can look at the price of food as advertised on websites, but that's different from the price of food on the street level. But through some of our research, one of the projects we did last year with a company called Price Stats shows that often online retailers raise their prices online a few weeks before on the ground street level prices go up because they know that their clientele has a little bit more expendable cash. So it almost gives you a leading indicator. So getting creative with these indicators has been something that's been really interesting in our exploration.
One of the things that is, I guess, in some ways surprising, though maybe if you've been in the industry for a long time, it's not so surprising, is the gap between what is possible and what companies actually can take advantage of. So the reality is that analyzing data and even thinking about how to analyze it and then thinking about how it maps to the business is a particular skill. And it's not a really common one. And it's not one that we have a lot of training for. And so thus many companies find themselves with lots of valuable data and absolutely no idea what to do with it. And so it's sort of surprising to see, how low the bar is right now in general worldwide in terms of how companies, what they do with the data and how they analyze it and how they map it to what their business goals are. And I feel like that's a place where, we talk about the job market and people looking for jobs, it's just there's a paucity of skills there in the marketplace. And so that's still surprising to me, given what the opportunity is, how slow the world has been in responding to taking advantage of it.
Interesting. Brendan?
Yeah, so at Etsy, we're constantly developing new products and new features and running experiments. And I think it's always fascinating and surprising to me when the intended behavior is so different than what actually happens, and something that seems super intuitive and clear for us as we're making it. The users are surprised by it, or angered, or confused. And so, for instance, we recently had some experiments where we're trying to make the buying process more smooth, and so we have drop-down menus for selecting sizes or colors, or shipping prices, and whereas before you would have to write this in through our messaging system to the seller, and so we thought this was definitely an improvement, something that would smoothen this process and lead to more purchases. And we actually found that in some cases this had an adverse effect on buying, some hypotheses would be that people were overwhelmed by doing these individual extra actions. And so, that was definitely a result that surprised me.
Chris?
So in terms of the surprising biology that comes out, read the papers, it's happening every day. In terms of my experience in dealing with genomic and clinical data, I was just stunned to learn how archaic and arbitrary the regulatory framework is when dealing with patient data, personally identifying data, all that kind of thing. Yeah. And these are laws that were written in the 80s and 90s at the behest of insurance companies. If you look at HIPAA, it's the Health Insurance Portability Act. If you look at CLIA, this is also not written for the benefit of the patient, really. And I was stunned to find out that there's a whole industry of consultants who will walk you through what is actually a fairly simple process. Yeah. And there's a tremendous amount of fear, uncertainty, and doubt about whether or not you can use servers that are outside the walls of your organization, whether you can use something that's called a cloud. If you just stop calling it a cloud and start calling it infrastructure as a service, does it slide right by? Yes, is the answer. The laws are written in a political framework, and it really actually kind of scares me to see the level of dialogue that's happening where those laws get written, where when the rubber meets the road, those of us who exist in this digital world have a pretty finessed understanding of privacy. It doesn't exist electronically. you know, and to imagine that you can have laws written in Washington that are appropriate for this sort of information is really surprising.
Well, that's interesting. Andrew, I have a feeling you're going to say something related.
I am, actually, yeah. So the whole notion of law was very interesting to me. And so New York City actually has legislation now that requires city government to unlock its data and make it available to the public. And, you know, with that thought in mind, I'm kind of wondering where we're going to be in 5 years in terms of our regulatory framework for doing exactly that. That'll be an interesting thing to see. I guess two things for me in terms of surprises. First is the answers to questions are not always where you think they're going to be. One example of this is the city has made some efforts to reduce risk of fires in certain types of structures around, you know, sort of around the 5 boroughs. And where we started out thinking that our data that was coming in through our 301 call center, so our customer service, you know, connection to the public, the data that was coming through there, the complaints about those sorts of issues were actually not where the problems really were, and it took a very serious dive. It took a very serious dive into a whole variety of data to start to tease out exactly what the factors were that contributed to those higher risks. So what we thought was, you know, just getting lots of complaints from the public actually turned out to be, you know, a whole variety of other factors. And coupled with that, we also kind of realized, or I think gelled our notion that our customer service initiatives have demographic limitations, and so now there's an effort to try and to adjust those and to, you know, improve access for all New Yorkers. And I think the second thing that for me is has been interesting is as we open up our data to the public, what amazes me is the amount of civic contribution that comes as a result of that. So, you know, we run an applications contest every year, and yeah, there's some financial incentive involved in that, but it's very minimal. But people come to the table and they really like to look at the city's data and they like to help us solve our problems. We've run a couple events just on Tuesday with DataKind here in conjunction with Strata, and then also again with DataKind a month ago. And the fact that 100 people came into a room and helped us look at our problems and say, you know, here are some interesting ideas as to how they can be answered was kind of stunning to me. So it may not be just about the data itself, but also around the ecosystem and the community that we're building. We're getting some surprises.
Interesting. Jennifer?
So, of course, we want to know how everyone shops, right? And so I'm going to talk about external data as well as internal data. So the external is not only like if you buy a mascara, we want to know what eyeliner you're buying online and where you like to look for it and et cetera. And that's been really helpful with developing our sites in that way. And of course, the Twitter feeds and what's going on at fashion shows and, you know, Instagram, and collecting all of that of who is actually buying our products. But what's more surprising to me is working in innovation internally and finding out how people feel about posting their ideas and the trends that come up online that way. I'm actually surprised about how much participation we do get with that. And as much as people do participate online, and we gather a lot of information that way that helps us to develop our retail locations as well as our online platforms and how and describing how people shop, is we lose the connectivity that really built our business, which was originally clienteling, which was gathering data by hand by actually talking to people in person. So as much as we're looking to get online and internally, you know, gather information that way, I've noticed that as we start to bring people together across brands, across regions, across functions, and even across departments, that their desire not only to find out what they're doing online, but to actually talk to each other and talk about the data that they're finding, which is a wonderful surprise for them.
Yeah, I think, again, there's an interesting sort of through line that is occurring here, is just the way in which some of the surprises bear on sets of relationships sort of outside the organization that lead to sort of other things that need to be addressed fundamentally in order to be able to drive this process forward. Speaking of the process itself, the thing that I wanted to ask next is, you know, and it's a sort of combined question. I think we can begin to open the conversation just sort of between the panelists rather than sort of going one by one. It's a combined question. One of them is, there are two buzzwords associated with what we're talking about here. One of them is big data, and the other is innovation. And so, I want to ask generally, and any of you can jump in as you like, in your organization, how are these things understood as in relationship to one another? And maybe even more specifically, what do you think about the term big data? What do you think that means? How does your organization interpret it? Again, anybody can take it away.
I work in the IT part of the NBC Universal, and I think when somebody says big data, immediately the folks that I work with that are on the enterprise data warehouse side, or somebody is like, oh, it's Hadoop, right? We need to talk about this, and I'm like, well, I don't have huge volumes of data. I just have I have a data problem. I don't have a problem big enough probably for the solutions that people want to bring to the table. The problem's more complex. It's in the relationships in the areas where the data is stored and the idea of bringing them together. So, big data is sort of a wrong thing to say for me. I've learned to start talking to people and saying I basically have a raw data problem instead of a big data problem.
That's interesting.
I agree. I'm a big skeptic when it comes to big data. I think that it's a term that has a lot of buzz in the media, and I think that for certain applications, I think in science and maybe in government, there are lots of applications for it. I think in the corporate world, there are a few places that are really ready for it, and I think it's just really hard for me to see many companies have any breakthroughs because of big data. I think that innovation, however, I'd be much less skeptical about. I think there's a lot of innovation going on, a lot of experimentation, and I think people are learning many things about their customer base, about buying habits, about how to connect things together. And so I think innovation is great and on the move, but I think that big data is kind of a buzz term.
Right on. Two naysayers. Now we need someone to say something about it.
That's not me.
Actually,
I'll go and talk a little more positive on it. It's been helpful to us that it is such a buzzword, actually.
Yeah.
When Global Pulse was established in the United Nations, it was an initiative launched by the Secretary General about now almost 3 years ago. We didn't have the buzz around big data then. And we were talking about the need for real-time data, the need for actionable information, digital signals, data exhaust. We were using a lot of terms, and none of them were really sticking with people. About a year ago, we hit a turning point when big data, the phrase, was very useful to us because it encompasses everything from what we are talking about, which is the ambient data that we generate all the time. So we also use it a little bit differently, but the fact that the word is out there and that there are articles all the time has really helped us in the last year explain it to the rest of the UN system and to our partners, that there's really a science here and that it's emerging and there really are technologies and there really are analytical tools and there really are huge data streams. Twitter stream is billions of tweets a day. So it's helpful to us to sort of catch all, but then we have found that we've had to redefine the term a little bit for our context. We just published a white paper on big data for development where we kind of created our own taxonomy. We sort of defined it, the type of data sources that are useful to development that fall into that category. So we've adapted it a bit, but it's been helpful to use the phrase as a catch-all.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think a little bit more narrowly about it. So I think a little bit more narrowly about it. To me, big data is certainly a buzzword and it's a catch-all. And for me, it embraces a set of technologies and a set of skills that are relatively new or are shifting the landscape of information technology quite a bit. The one thing that I see is that they're very low cost. They are dramatically different from, sort of big house BI tools. Although there is obviously a lot of buzzwording happening there as, larger vendors pick up the term and start to adapt those technologies into their traditional mainstream products. But I also think those tools, the new tools, bring a much greater degree of flexibility than I've ever been seen before. And along with that, I think the skills that are needed are different than what's ever been done before. I mean, traditionally you had sort of data analysts and data warehouse folks and folks who knew how to ask the right questions, and I think you still have that, but the skill set of that is changing and requires a lot more of, you know, what's being traditionally, or not traditionally, but more and more what's being called data science, where you need to have statistical knowledge, you need to have an understanding of technology, and those things coming together really brings you to a more comfortable and powerful place in terms of just, you know, in terms of being able to answer questions. But I do agree that at some point it is literally about just being able to answer more interesting questions about your data and having more powerful tools to do that.
So I had no idea what big data was. I'd never even heard the term before. And I started to ask around my organization, various platforms, do you know what this is? And most people were like, no. I have no idea what you're talking about, except that we have put in place, and I don't sound surprised by this, like 2 years ago, we put in a data analysis department. And we're always asking, how do women shop? What do they want? Like basically, what do you want, right? And there's 4 different avenues in which you can go and purchase products. Why do you choose one over the other? And how do we gather what our employees are thinking all the time? So I guess this does fall into the big data, but it really is the analytics. And where I ask from an innovative point of view is like, okay, if I give you the answer, what are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. What are you really going to do now that you have this information? Mm-hmm. There's so many avenues in which you can create or that you can shop and create a new experience for yourself. And you're a consumer. I mean, we live in this country, or you live in a society, so you purchase things, so you're automatically a consumer. It's how do we get beyond there? So when people ask me for this analysis statistic and I'm moving forward with that, I always kind of look at them and say, you know, what are you going to do with it? And then why don't you allow yourself the permission to say yes in the problems in which you said no? So when you said, no, we couldn't do that, or no, we couldn't create, you know, use all this information in a way to create a new product line for a consumer, what if you just said yes and allowed yourself the freedom to create and evolve new data that would be helpful for you to move the business forward?
That's interesting. I think, you know, the thing that the answer sort of put me in the mind of is just this distinction, I think, and Andrew and I had plenty of time to talk about this when we were working together, but, you know, there's the ability to collect data, and then you have to organize and structure that data in such a way, and then you have to use it. And these are all of them in their own way difficult steps, of course, but it's that sort of using data, the insights from the data, being able to parse out the signal from the noise, and figuring out in what way that's actionable. And I think that's, you know, it's funny talking about the various different capacities that need to be encouraged in those people who are coming up in the various different businesses. It's really that ability to think creatively about really how to turn a signal into something that's actionable, that's ultimately going to transform the experience that people are having.
Because we're always asking, like, you were talking about, like, the tweets, like there's a billion tweets going on, right? So everyone, get on Twitter, right? Tweet about it right away. Like you just saw, you know, MAC eyeshadow walk down the runway. Everyone's talking about it. Well, who cares? Is it driving a sale? Is it driving a new trend? How are you utilizing that to give yourself the power to find that inspiration and turn it into action, into creating a new process, to creating a new program? So just because you're participating in it or generating the information, to your point exactly, it doesn't mean that anything is actually it's the same word as using big data. What does that mean? It's just a term. Or using the word innovation. Everyone's talking about innovation all the time, but unless you really create it into action and something that's new, what's the big deal about saying innovation?
So let me ask you a question, because it's come up several different times, and I think people have commented on it a lot, and to the degree that you're able to answer. And this is not a question that we had talked about, but it's one that sort of struck me. Social media, you know, it obviously has produced an immense amount of data, and much of it applicable in some way to all of the work that's done by the individuals who are sitting here. I'm wondering if you can talk sort of briefly about what the view of your organization is about social media, especially in relationship to that question of using data to create new innovative models or actions. Again, I'll open it.
So I'll take that one first. We are at this crossroads where social media information that you publish about yourself is pretty obviously owned by you and given for free to the world. You're telling the world a fact about yourself. And it's still the case legally that your physician owns the data that they collect about you and you are given access to it. And there is a model of medical care where the patient takes responsibility for themselves and can give data about themselves to their physician to give them advice. There's a tremendous opportunity, I think, for something like a social media framework to provide tremendous support to people. A third of prescriptions go basically underutilized because patients are non-compliant. They don't take the pills at the right times. And you could imagine if we can have Nike posting to Facebook, and then your friends like your status that you're running, and you hear cheering through your iPhone, your earphones. That's really cool. It encourages you to exercise. I think that there's an opportunity to stitch this all together, but it's going to be very, very tricky, I think.
Yeah.
I think for NBC, that social media is really looked at in two different ways. In one respect, it's new audience measurement. And for instance, there's a website called Trender that aggregates together, social media hashtags about the different shows, and we pay very close attention to that, especially when we're deciding, when we have our traditional audience measurement like Nielsen, and we're comparing how well are we doing with, let's say, the consumption that's happening in broadcast. There's things happening now with second screen and in other monetization windows where we're getting a lot of social media buzz, and it gives us different insights and feedback than we're actually getting from our traditional measurement tools. So I think, those are one way that, we really look at social media. The other is really in the engagement platform on the second screen. It's becoming very big to us to really get, that second screen engagement while shows are being watched as well. So on both fronts.
United Nations and a lot of public sector social change type organizations, obviously social media has taken off as an advocacy and an engagement tool for sure. That's been happening naturally over the last couple of years. Most UN agencies now have an online presence, have a Twitter presence, do campaigns and social media, and are learning also the analytics to monitor how far did we reach, what is our audience engagement like. We're trying to push the envelope to another layer of that, and it's closer to the measurement, but almost even more is sort of the sensor. And it is similar to what the private sector can do with branding and things, and the way that you might monitor brand perception. We think, okay, not only could we use Twitter to advocate for HIV awareness or World AIDS Day, but could you also look at the change in perception over time based on the tweets that come back? Or, we worked with SAS and one of their analytics tools we looked at unemployment as if it was a brand. We used their tool, but they used to just, do sentiment and brand monitoring, and we said, well, what if we looked at unemployment as a brand? What do people talk about? What's the chatter online like before an unemployment spike and after an unemployment spike? And really, it's just the same methodology, the keywords, the sentiment, working with the machine to sort of train it to look for the certain keywords and things you're looking for. But that's where we see it going next, because the volumes of information on social media are growing at large numbers, certainly in some countries.
I think that social media has, and analytics around it, are a huge opportunity for companies if they're conservative about what they expect from it. So I think it's great to identify trends, and the volume data is so high that traditional sampling methodologies work to be able to understand what the basic trends are. I think that companies' ability to then understand those trends and figure out what it means on a day-to-day basis and how to take advantage of them, I think that we're not all the way there yet, and that there's a lot of work to do. But I think that social media in general and the analytics around it are hugely powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with that for sure. Social media, with regards to Etsy, is definitely becoming more and more important. It's a huge promotional tool, a big, social, user engagement tool. I mean, it's on listing pages, people can, you know, pin their items or tweet about it or like it on Facebook, and, you know, you're able to get that word out to this huge graph of people. And, you know, we're really trying to understand how we can utilize it the best. And I think we recognize that all different social media, you know, Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, not all of that traffic or people that come in from those avenues are created equal. And so those are different types of people that interact with Etsy in different ways. And so we're trying to understand and figure out how we can use that to our advantage.
Social media has definitely helped to develop our business in ways that we've not even thought of yet. And, you know, to your point, we're still working on how to harness that. But I don't know how many of you know, but L'Oreal made it famous that they hired a blogger who was doing makeup instructions on YouTube, and she had so many hits that she does them for Lancome now. So the employment rate of how do we use, you know, popular bloggers to promote our brands and openly sharing that for a luxury corporation such as Lauder. I mean, not even Estee Lauder brand, but Tom Ford. I mean, it's a $42 lipstick, and it's being promoted on YouTube by someone who's 25 years old. Yes, it's $42. And but, you know, this is, I mean, it's Tom Ford. It's not like you're buying a drugstore brand. And the importance of the traffic that we have there, or Pinterest, is also something that we're still trying to understand. We just know we have to play in this game more and more. Even the location aspect of it, locating where we are, is become a big driver to our business.
So it's interesting, again, I think I must be, my role this evening is something like the trend spotter in the answers. The one that's really struck me here is the reappearance again and again of the word trying. We're trying, we're attempting, so I'm wondering if we can maybe just take a moment to get your thoughts generally about your own efforts within your own organizations, but also you know, with regard to the phenomenon of big data that may or may not go under the proper name big data. What's the maturity of the effort, generally speaking? And maybe even thinking a little bit about what would we need to take the next steps toward maturing this practice, right? The practice of structuring data, of sort of parsing out the signal from the noise, and then figuring out how that signal is actionable.
I think it's a combination of skills that, you know, it's, I think as some people have mentioned, like when you talk about real big data, it's data science. It's not a data analyst. It's not skills that many of us have, quite frankly. And I think organizations that truly have big data opportunities, it's combining data scientist with someone who has a market focus to understand, well, you know, what are the questions that we're seeking to answer, and how are they going to change our business or open up new opportunities or give us new ways to monetize our content and our data. And it's really figuring out how to put those two different kinds of skills together and get them to work effectively. I think that's, so I would say it's really immature, and the steps to maturity are going to require us to invest in new skills and new ways of working together.
Couldn't be more correct. I think in my environment, one of the things that we've really learned is that the different people that need to be working together in order to solve these problems are in totally different organizations. Yeah. And it's hard to get people involved in an incubator project like the one that I'm working on to donate their time and their interest. And what you'll find is, you know, after 9 months, I've been lucky that I've been able to grow myself into about 4 different organizations. But the one place that we haven't grown very well is with the business. So the key business questions, it's like, why are we building this? What kind of questions do you want to ask? We're trying to be a business proxy. You know, there's so much division between shared services and the business that if we could sort of grow together a little bit more, we would understand more of what they're looking to do. For instance, I know, you know, we could help them with their green lighting process if we were able to deliver these tools to them. And this is like 2 years away, but, you know, if we had more of an understanding of what questions are you trying to ask, we'd be able to adapt a lot faster.
Can I speak to that? So the what questions are you trying to ask comment. I get that a lot because trying to develop with internally, and sometimes you just don't even know. Like at this point, you have no idea. It's really harnessing this new rebirth of an entrepreneurial spirit that's not only of smaller companies outside, but you see it most of larger corporations. I hate to use this term, but it's entrepreneurial. And it's really creating what you were saying before about developing new categories. So if you were in an analytics department, maybe you're a data science, but how does that become a new data marketing firm? And not in the traditional sense of how we're looking at it. So we're really having the courage to take the risk to ask these questions and to develop it in a new way, to see if this actually does work for our industries.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does take a lot of different skills and a bunch of different kinds of people. I mean, there's definitely a lot of technical ability that you need and engineering capabilities of just collecting all of this data and storing it somewhere and being able to process it. You need the analyst side of once the data is in a form that's manageable, looking for patterns and trends. And you're right. I mean, you definitely do need that statistical math background too, so that you can understand if this is something that matters or is significant in a real way. And so yeah, I mean, I think it's challenging. It takes a lot of skills. I think we're getting to a point now where I think up till now, like the data collection and infrastructure process for big data has been hard and has taken a while. And now we're getting to a point where we're getting the hang of collecting the data and storing it. And so now we have more time to actually process it and analyze it. So I think that's a nice development.
Yeah, you are exactly right. One of the transitions that I've seen just in the past few years is today it's pretty straightforward to stand up petabyte scale data storage. You go out, you make vendors bid, you buy something and they build it, which was not true 5 years ago. Similarly, it's fairly straightforward to stand up 10 gig networks and be able to sling this stuff around. What is absolutely lacking, I love the term raw data. In terms of collaborating within an institution, imagine, if you will, a worldwide community of researchers, each of whom wants you to store their data, because one of the big problems was that the old model of a genome center was that you would send sample and get a hard disk back. And that hard disk would sit as a doorstop or on a bookshelf someplace. And one of our innovations is that, hey, instead of shipping you a disk, I'm going to give you a network account. And you can come into my shop and see your data in situ. And then two people discover they're both working with us, and they say, hey, let's work together. We're both doing developmental physiology on autistic kids. And it turns out they use totally different file formats and languages and ontologies and everything else. And then they come to me and they say, so what's the right answer? And I have no idea. Then one of those key surprises was, okay, how much ego do I have to let go of to make them solve a problem that's in their area of expertise? And what tools do I need to provide to do that? And it turns out to be something that's easy to buy. Big petascale storage, fast networks, network accounts.
Just the gaps between what different people know are vast. I just put the panelists, we line us all up with our skills and what we know. And maybe we need all of us together in a room to come up with a usable answer. And there are big gaps.
I think organizational size factors into that too. I work for an organization that is, if you were to rank it on the Fortune 500 or even Fortune 100 by company order, we would kick out Pepsi at number 9. We have 300,000 employees in the city. That's massive. And so when you're trying to steer a ship that big and you're trying to encourage people to adopt those new technologies and new ways of thinking about things, that's a tremendously difficult thing to do. So it's probably no secret that perceptually government is behind the curve, and there are a lot of ways in which, frankly, we are. However, we are absolutely seeing small pockets of really, really advanced thinking. Things like being able to predict where crime is going to happen or where structural fire is going to happen. Those are things that save lives and are very, very valuable. So we're going after them first. But there's plenty of in the health arena. There's in epidemiology and things like that. There's massive opportunities where we're starting to exploit the technology and exploit the skills in order to drive forwards. And I think as we continue to build that, as we continue to build those pockets, that's going to spread out into a much larger ecosystem, and we're going to start to see communities of interest around it, just even within the government organizations, right? And then so we'll, I think we're a little bit behind the curve, but we're getting there, and we're focusing on very, very critical things before we start to worry about, I guess, the less critical things.
I think an important point that is being built on here is not just the science of it, but also the design thinking that has been applied. Like what you were just talking about, like finding out where a crime is going to happen first. That was creative thinking that was put behind that. So without the new application of design thinking and the creative open mindset to this analysis platform, we wouldn't be able to help evolve this aspect.
What would you, so again, here it is, trend spotting. What do you think, I'm hearing that the answer in part has to do with being able to leverage all of the potential that is inherent to an organization by working against its current forms of standardized operating procedures. It goes through this silo and then comes through this silo and then goes through this silo and then comes through this silo. So what would you take to be the first most important step to making that kind of change toward being able to activate the genuine innovation power of big data analysis?
I was really encouraged. I felt like that last session was sort of a therapy session of how hard this is, and this is really great as a vindication of we feel the same way. And it's really about bringing that cross-section together, which can be hard in an institution similar to the government of New York City, so the United Nations also is a huge organization, huge bureaucracy, has a certain way of doing things. So we've decided to tackle it through creating these pulse labs or these innovation spaces, so that we're really trying to create a sandbox, because it really is something that in a normal line of business you wouldn't, as you were saying, you drop what you're doing and really start to explore this new stuff. It's so exploratory, and it's kind of detract people from what they're supposed to be doing every day. So what we've been trying to do is create an ecosystem of people from across the UN system who now have seen some of our proofs of concept and say, okay, I see, there's something here. Let me bring you a problem statement. And we know that the expertise in the data science is really outside the UN system. So we're trying to cultivate partnerships outside companies that have analytics tools, experts, social data scientists who might be willing to work on a project. But it's a slow process. It's that co-designing the right project, finding the right project that's going to yield some kind of impact. So the result of what we do is useful to somebody in some way. And we've been slow to pull the trigger on actually executing some of the projects because that design phase is so important. If you're going to invest the time and the energy, you want to pick the right project that's going to be, either it's low-hanging fruit, or if it's successful, there's actual applications for it. So we're taking the lab R&D approach.
I work in an organization that, since we're shared services, our usual model is that everything is allocated back to the business. So it's really hard to carve off a group of people. And, when you have your business paying for an innovation group to exist, they're like, what value am I getting for this? So we're going through this transition right now. We have to basically carve ourselves off. It has to be very few people. We have to come up with a prototype, and then we have to sell through the prototype. And we're working our way through it. We won't get full funding to move forward on something very large, though, until there's that allocation for the business that's guaranteed.
I think one thing we're doing at Etsy is we had a slight organizational change to improve this process, and so we started this new data team, which is part engineers and part analysts, and we sit all right next to each other. And so, the engineers do a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the tooling, and making sure the data is being collected properly. And then the analysts, once the data is there, they're able to query against it and really use it. But I think, the fact that we're all together, there's a lot of knowledge sharing there. And so, there's a better appreciation of the nuances that go into collecting and using this data, and so I think there's a line that's perhaps blurring between engineers and analysts, where even some analysts now are able to interact with Hadoop and write Hadoop jobs, and so that's a nice it's a nice development.
That's interesting.
Yeah, the organizational transparency is absolutely critical, and being willing to discover who in your organization has expertise that they may not have been willing to share because it's not in their job description. Right. I mean, my example from this week is that there's a lab tech who now has root on my servers because he came along and had like 3 good ideas with code to back it up in a row. And I was like, you know what, just install what you're doing great stuff. And so it's a lab tech. He's supposed to be moving fluids from vat to vat with a pipette. And he was coming up with great integrative data thinking. And to be able to empower that as an organization, we're very, very small, we're very, very lean right now, so I can still get away with saying, oh, okay, you're now partly on my team. And that's something that I hear across the table, is being able to scrape together these cross-functional teams out of existing resources.
So this is my whole, pretty much my whole business. I run an ideation portal internally, and I also do rapid prototyping and everything. So I am my department with one kind of part-time person. And the greatest discoveries, you hit the nail on the head, is everything we do is volunteer with innovation. And Estee Lauder Corporation is known for driving innovation in the beauty industry above all other companies. And that is what we do as a product output, but helping our people internally discover new talents of innovation and inspiration is a new area of business for us. And with this ideation portal and other practices that we're using, we've been able to do that. And it's all volunteer basis by creating innovation ambassadors throughout the organization on a regional, functional, and brand level. A great example of this is that we ran a challenge for the Darphin brand, which is a luxury skincare brand in France. And we had a chemist, a chemical engineer by trade, answer the question about service innovation for the Darphin brand. And what she did was she rendered a full-scale design platform for this brand online. She was a chemical engineer, a full-scale design platform. She practices design in her on her own time. So that was a way of mining data in a differently. And we also had a girl, this is another amazing story, from France, who works for the Beauty Bank brand, has been with our corporation for 2 years, designed not only a suggestion for the La Mer brand's gifting strategy, but wrote pretty much their entire strategy. 24 years old, with the company, working in marketing in France, and through allowing them this inspiration and innovation way of communicating, it's in the strategy deck for this new way of finding information. So it's tough moving forward, but it's definitely been successful for us.
That's interesting. So I think that this has been an amazing conversation between all of us up here, but I think it's probably time for us to open questions to the audience. We are recording this evening, and I don't think we have a mic to pass around, so if you would be so kind, when you stand to ask a question, stand up and just shout it out. I'll repeat the question so that we can hear it on camera, and then we'll have the panel take a stab at it. So if there are any questions, just stand up and shout it out. Oh my, okay. Okay, there we go.
For students aspiring to be data scientists, do you think there's some, standard skill set that you would see as valuable in either of your industries? Do you think there's something that would be uniformly useful?
Yeah.
Like, be it tools, be it different kinds of classes? What are the sort of things that you're looking for?
That's a great question. So let me just repeat it for the camera. She'd asked whether or not there was a sort of uniform set of skills that a data scientist would need to have in order to be useful sort of across different industries.
So, I can take a stab at that from at least the government angle. First, public policy is a big part of that. Second is algorithms and just information technology in general, and then third is math and statistics. I think those are kind of the focus areas, at least that I would recommend.
Yeah, I would say one thing of note from listening to the other panelists is none of us are actually in the data business. And so I would say get really good at something that's actually a business and have the tool. Obviously you need to be able to write basic web code. Obviously you need to be able to understand how a Unix, Linux file system works. And beyond that, communication. I would say being able to talk across disciplines. If you can explain a problem in your discipline to me and bring me a script that you use to solve a problem, you can probably have a job for a while.
I was going to say the same thing. The most important thing, no matter what you're doing, is to be able to communicate what you're saying. So marketing yourself as your own brand, no matter what your interest is, there's all the technical analysis that you'll need to have as basic what the industry is, but being able to sell yourself in a constructive and honest way, and not just in the US. You need to be global. You need to know how to communicate in other cultures. Even if you only speak English, it's better if you speak multiple languages. If you ever had an interest in speaking another language, do it. But understand the cultural differences. It's a global industry. You need to understand the respect levels and how to communicate on a global level.
So, sorry. Oh no, I was just going to say, so as someone who works with a lot of data every day, I would say that it's becoming, I think, more and more important to have perhaps some sort of technical chops. And I don't think this is a prerequisite at all, but I think it's very helpful to know some sort of basic understanding of like a dynamic or like a scripting language like Python or Ruby. I think a very good statistical intuition and understanding is crucial, definitely, and being able to throw data into R or Stata and be comfortable in that environment is very important. So I think those are two biggies for sure.
I would also say it's really important to understand the nature of data and how models work. So I think that a lot of people don't understand the fundamental nature of data and statistics that are reported, and they look at them, they hear something, they think that it's truth, that it's a depiction of what actually happened. And in many cases it's not. It's just an approximation of what actually happened, and that's gone through a lot of different modeling exercises and different assumptions that have affected what it says. And I think that understanding how to model data, essentially how to tell a story with it, and to explain it as a framework that helps get to an approximation of what the answer might be, is a really valid skill, an important one, to be effective.
I would add to that as well. My experience in government and now also in the private sector, it goes back to some of the answers that we were talking about earlier, where there needs to be organizational change such that the genuine advantages that are offered by data that can be used toward real innovation in service or product or design is the ability to make a translation between business leaders and the people who are working deeply with the technology. So if you have a facility to be that translator, if you know both what the goals and the interests and the sort of language of the business leaders are, as well as the goals and the interests of the deeper technologists are, oftentimes the people who are playing that translating role, organizations are coming to understand just what importance they play in the kind of transformation that the organization needs to undergo in order to be or to become the future version of itself. Are there other questions? Yeah, right here.
Actually, I wanted to jump off of that point. I was hoping to hear from the panelists about the upstream part of the story. One is, how are your organizations working to define the strategy that informs data research and analysis? And then the second part is, how do you view research broadly in context with data? And do you see a difference?
The question is to do with how it is that the organizations strategize about data, and then how a research program is part of that strategy.
I wouldn't mind taking this one. We do a lot of work with companies who think that they have something. We know we have this data asset or this content asset and it has value. We're just not exactly sure what it is. So the way we approach it is really with a market focus, is to first understand what the questions are that they perhaps can help answer, and really focus on the market and focus on what is currently not answerable, and then go back and do the R&D with them to figure out whether they can meet that answer. So that's our approach to solving that problem.
Yeah, I think at Etsy, we're really excited about using all this data. We have more and more to develop data-driven products, and I think research is just a part of that process. And I think we're sitting on just massive amounts of data, and I think upstream, something I'm really excited about is using it to create a more like personalized experience. So for people that come in and view a wallet or something, the next time they come to Etsy, maybe their experience can be slightly different than someone that we don't have any information for, and so maybe we can use that to make them have a better experience. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities for personalization and tailoring, their experience while shopping. And so there's definitely a lot of products that we're thinking about around that.
So for the city, New York has traditionally, since at least Mayor Bloomberg was elected mayor, has been a data-driven city, and so a lot of the big policy decisions that you see the city making that eventually ripple out to the rest of the country and possibly the world are really based upon hard data. I just learned recently how the decisions were made about prioritizing things like smoking in public places and smoking in restaurants and things like that, and how that decision was made, and then how the current initiatives to reduce obesity are driving the policies around large sodas being purchased in movie theaters and things like that. So a lot of the way, at least this administration has been operating, is very much under a data-driven premise, and I think where we're going next is into sensors, into getting and collecting information about our city in ways that don't require people to actively do things on their smartphones, but will still enable us to understand the pulse and be able to adapt our city and plan our city out for the foreseeable future. So a lot, there's a lot of great things that already have been happening, and certainly a tremendous number of things to come.
We try to do the R&D together with a stakeholder who, if the experiment and the test of the data research was useful, could do something about it. Sort of the so what. So we have a way to better understand perceptions of HIV by looking at Twitter. So what? So we want to work with the agency or the bureau or the office or the department who cares, and try to find something to spend their time doing the data research with, to find something that would be then useful to them. And should the new data source be useful, then help together prototype a tool or an app that will then help them embed that into their workflow. So if we want to explore mobile phone data and see if it's a useful data source to understand sort of mobility after a flood, well, then we would have to prototype an app or a tool or an extension so that a mobile phone company can use that and give that data to the appropriate bureau or agency or department or government partner or UN office that handles that kind of information. So we're trying to do the R&D together with the stakeholder who would take it upstream or mainstream the use of it once we've explored it in the sandbox environment.
We have time for one more question or two.
I'm seeing more and more companies or entities hiring chief data officers. I'm wondering, what do you think is the necessity of this sort of executive level person who's managing this?
That's a good question. Let me repeat it into the microphone. She'd asked how they understand the necessity of the role of naming a chief data officer. I suppose the question is whether it's necessary or how they understand it.
So if I can jump in front of that, the single biggest thing that you can do as an organization to make your data useful is to have someone relatively draconian at the top. Their title doesn't have to be Chief Data Officer, who will bang on the table and say, no, you may not have a little file server in a closet that I can't get to. No, you may not silo everything out. And this person may speak in terms of economies of scale and finance, and they may just be really difficult to work with. If you don't already have a Chief Information Officer or a Chief Technology Officer who is willing to be that mean, I think a CDO is a decent idea. But particularly in the academic environment, data skew and drift between departments because there is no single person who will bang on the table. It's a big, big problem.
There definitely needs to be a lead champion. I don't know in my organization if CDO necessarily makes sense because we have a very large CIO's office, but the one thing that I've learned working across different groups is that there's a very big pride of ownership of data sources. And it's very hard to get buy-in or even just permission to start working with different data that belongs to different organizations. Even if you have a top-down initiative from a different type of executive, you have to have the culture inside of at least the CIO's office to say, this is what we should be doing.
I think the need for chief data officers is even beyond just from it's different from a CIO, right, of how we're seeing that go. It's really the importance of you have to have a champion that can sit right next to the CEO to help allow you the opportunity to develop. So the chief data officers that I've seen in other companies, that title doesn't exist within ours, we have others, is really a combination of not only some people from the IT department, but really from marketing too. And the research departments, like information systems, where you're finding trends and information outside of the industry and bringing it inside, as well as for us of how people shop and where we're being mentioned. But you always need the champion at the top, because not only just shifting your culture, but really shifting a climate within an organization to being open to understanding of how you're going to need this for the future. As I mentioned before, we're really looking at, I consider ourselves really looking at this more as an entrepreneurial spirit, and having somebody up there that's going to give you the funds to move forward is extremely important.
All right, one last question.
So big data allows us to really determine the trends and what consumers are doing, but oftentimes it leaves out why they're doing it, and that was really what drives some consumer behavior. So do you think that data analysts should be working with psychologists and sociologists to be reading in between the lines to tell that story, or is the solution more data that determines the relationship as to what different aspects of people's behavior is driving the ultimate behavior?
Wow, okay, that was a great question. I'll see what I can do to summarize it into the microphone again. The question is predicated on the notion that looking at data tells what consumers are doing, but doesn't answer the question as to why they're doing it. So the question is as to whether or not data scientists and those working with data ought to be working with sociologists and psychologists to work on that, or whether or not the data itself, consuming more data from different sources and mashing it up in different ways, will answer that kind of question for us.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think, to me, it's a combination of both. I mean, I think as we get smarter, we can collect more and more variables and metrics that can try to tease out some of that why and that social behavior. But I think it would be super useful and helpful to work with psychologists, social psychologists. I mean, I'm always fascinated by social psychology and why people do the things they do, and a lot of the heuristics and biases we have, and so I think that would be very useful to work with them and brainstorm experiments and hypotheses about why people do the things they do, and then tinker with a product or feature and test that out.
It's a really great question. One we've been thinking about a lot as well. I mean, certainly correlation doesn't equal causation, and some of the explorations we've done and the research we've looked into certainly show that. And so we're very conscious to always, whenever we're talking about it, advocating for it, brainstorming around this, to keep reminding our partners that so much, especially when you're talking about social media data, is there's an ethnographic dimension. There's language, there's context, there's slang, and even the data that's not social or qualitative, but quantitative, like mobile phone data, movement patterns, for example. Let's say you were, several years from now, let's say we were able to monitor movement, so to sort of monitor migration patterns. If a certain city or something where there used to be a lot of activity, suddenly there is not, that might be alarming unless you dig in and realize that that's a college town and it's summer break. That's why people left. It's not because there was a crisis and people evacuated the area. So certainly there's context in all of this, and we've been, I guess, working to make sure that when we do a project, we have domain experts or sociologists or experts who have the country knowledge, country level knowledge to work on these things with us, but I think social scientists and behavioral psychologists are also a great asset.
Another way, we haven't necessarily, but just in general, there's EEG analysis, which is where they put it's a sensory mechanism that you can use on your brain. So when you show somebody an advertisement or a video clip, or even the way your web is, so looking instead of from the back end of data of how you're shopping backwards and collecting information, that way you're looking at it from the front end. So where is your eye visually drawn to? Why are you more interested in a woman stroking her hand this way instead of stroking it the other way, and the implications there? So with traditional focus groups, we're able to ask that social psychology of why are you shopping, and for one brand or for another. But really with EEG testing, you're able to see visually the inherent of where you're drawn to first. Now, is that going to help you drive sales and business and everything? Yes and no. Again, is more information just more information? Or is it really helping you at the end? EEG testing and analysis in how people walk through department stores, yes, that happens. You're being taped. When you go through, where is the pattern of how one person shops? If you're driven to buying shoes, that drives you to go to getting a lipstick, then you go get skincare. What is a psychological analysis with that? It's helpful, but again, I was talking about this earlier. Is it just more information? It's just more information. Are you ever going to know why you actually do what you do?
I think, at least from the government standpoint, if your view on government is that you want the government to be reactionary and there when you need it, then it's probably less necessary to have the social science side of it. But if you view government as a foundation for improving society and helping culture advance, then absolutely. A lot of the things that we do are really driven around behavioral change, right? Like the whole notion of what I was talking about with fire risk, about how we were able to identify a greater fire risk than what was being reported to us, was by at least trying to recognize what some of the factors would be in causing that, and one of them was financial distress. So once we identified that, we started looking at the data factors that fed into that, and then came up with a very positive correlation to that. So absolutely, in that regards, social science is very, very necessary to what we do and how we want to evolve.
Very interesting. Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists for being here tonight and engaging in this great conversation. I don't want it to end now. It looks as though they're setting up something in the back, and I think we have an opportunity now to just talk with the panelists, but in a more informal situation. So if you would, just take this opportunity to thank them with me.